Hello everybody, and welcome to Exposed Montana. I'm your host Sandra, and I thank you very much for joining us for our very first episode. Now this first episode is taking us to the city of Great Falls, Montana, and the disappearance of Zackary Ramsey and the discovery of the remains of Cascade County Doe. On the chilly morning of February 6, 1996, a day that marks 28 years ago, Zackary Ramsey left his home to head to school. He was last seen walking down an alleyway at the corner of 5th Avenue North and 5th Street in Great Falls. In the days, weeks, and years that followed his disappearance, a tragic story began to emerge in this unsuspected northern town. Located in the north central of Montana, Cascade County, Great Falls, or Electric City as it had originally been known, was founded in 1883 by Paris Gibson and James Hill. The city is home to 5 hydraulic dams, thus its original name. Great Falls is also home, to Malmstrom, I hope I'm saying that right, Air Force Base. The city is rich in diversity, due in huge part, I would imagine, to the base and the lovely native population. Zackary had relocated to Montana with his mother, Rachel Howard, and his brothers in 1995. By February 1996, he was known as a happy, well-adjusted little boy. All the books, newspapers, and documents I could find echoed the sentiments of teachers and educational staff, praising him as a delightful student. The photos available depict a healthy, broad-smiling Zack, whose grin was certainly infectious. Unfortunately, I lack extensive background information on young Zack due to his very young age and the fact that his case occurred 28 years ago in a small Montana town. Zackary never made it to school that morning. Around 10 a.m., adhering to school policy, the staff called Rachel at her job in a local restaurant to excuse his absence. Alarmed by the call, Rachel, a hard-working single mother of 3 boys, assumed Zack was at school. Having lived in the state for only about a year, she wasn't sure whom to turn to for help in checking on Zack's whereabouts. His father, Franz Ramsey, a U.S. Air Force staff sergeant stationed at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, was not nearby. Rachel later confessed she had wondered if he was skipping school. She left work to search for her son, trying to remain calm, but an unease took over. Of his usual hangouts, she searched the neighborhood, calling out his name, but with no success. She then went to a school to inform them of her inability to locate him and quickly dialed 911. When the police arrived, Rachel explained to the officers that Zack was not a shy boy. He was friendly with strangers, but understood not to get into vehicles or go anywhere with somebody he did not know. She recalled a past incident where Zack had briefly run away, but he had returned home within an hour, worried about her and his brothers. This time, there was no sign of him, and it was agreed upon that it was highly unlikely he had left voluntarily. He could not have simply just vanished. She provided the officers with detailed information about her oldest son, including recent photographs. Zackary was born on December 18th in 1985. He was an interracial boy with a lovely dark complexion, dark brown hair, and eyes. Rachel described him as being around 4 feet tall, weighing approximately 100 pounds, and having dimples. On the day he left for school, he was wearing stoned wash jeans, a football jersey with his last name on the back, Ramsey, high-top sneakers, and blue denim jacket with green sleeves. He had glasses, but he had left them at home that morning. Now, taking the case of the missing child very seriously from the onset, the police quickly began canvassing the area, going door to door to inquire if anyone had seen Zack, or noticed anything unusual. Urging residents to check garages, sheds, or any outbuildings for signs of him, they also searched Whittier Elementary School, examining the grounds thoroughly and continuing their door-to-door inquiries. Friends and family were interviewed in hopes of uncovering something new, but sadly no one had seen Zack. Search parties composed of officers, citizens, bloodhounds scoured the banks of the Missouri River. A significant search party was placed in Gibson Park, a large park in the north central of Great Falls, not far from Zackary's home. Searchers dug through snowbanks looking for any trace of Zackary, but unfortunately they found no signs of the missing boy. Neighbors were eager to assist in any way they could during the search for Zackary. During the door-to-door interviews, several individuals recalled seeing a man in the alley around the same time Zack was last seen. One witness even mentioned spotting a cream-colored four-door car parked near the 400th block of 5th Avenue North between 7 a.m. and 7:15. Others reported seeing young Zack walking down the alleyway behind 5th Avenue North around 7:30 a.m., with one person noting that Zack nearly got hit by the off-white, not the off-white, but a off-white color car as he exited the alley and tried to cross onto 5th Street North. Another man told officers he had witnessed Zack around 7:45 a.m. crying and being followed by an agitated man as he had crossed the 6th Street North. Although the witness provided a vague description of this man, multiple interviewees confirmed they saw Zack take the alleyway that morning. The reported time frames are somewhat puzzling, as it typically doesn't take 15 minutes to walk from 5th Avenue North to 6th Street. This raises the possibility that some interaction occurred between Zack and the man, which could explain the delay and Zackary's tears. Regardless, enough people confirmed seeing him on that route, and since Zack did not arrive at school for his 8:15 a.m. meetup with friends, something was definitely amiss. I'm just going to let you guys know, if I am not going to get through this without a couple fumbly bumblies. If you're still here, bless you. The local newspaper, the Great Falls Tribune, published photographs of the missing boy, while local print shops produced thousands of posters featuring Zackary. Later, servicemen and women from the nearby Malmstrom Air Force Base volunteered their time to assist in the search, but unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Detective Bill Balashi, I'm not 100% sure I'm pronouncing this man's name correctly, so from here on out, I'm going to call him Detective B, was a man at the time in his late 30s, with 18 years under his belt at the Great Falls Police Department. He was assigned as the lead investigator in the missing persons case of Zackary Ramsey. The assignment brought back some memories for the man. 8 years earlier, 8-year-old Delana Clark had been abducted and murdered. That's another case we'll definitely be covering in the future. The detective had a gut instinct this case was going to turn out for the worse, but he'd hoped he was wrong. The local FBI was brought in to assist, and a special agent by the name of James Wilson. He was assigned to provide assistance to the local police as well. The detective had an idea of whom may have taken the boy, and he and the agent began to look into a specific person. Now, all had indeed not been golden in Great Falls for quite some time before that stark February morning in '96. An evil had moved into town 4 years earlier. This is the part where I'm forced to give airspace and time to a monster in human skin. Now, I'm going to say this monster's name only once, out of information's sakes. From then on, I will only refer to this thing as monster or perp or whatever name comes to mind. That is what it is. That is all it deserves. That's all he's going to get from me. This is Zackary's story, not his. Now this monster, his name, or now shall I say, the monster called himself Nathaniel Barjona. And from the first day that Zack had gone missing, the lead detective on the case had a dark thought in the back of his mind. Oddly enough, the man on the back of the detective's mind didn't make the list of the 10 offenders having lived in the area at the time of the disappearance. But Detective B went ahead and added his name to the list manually. This monster was 38 years old when his name was added to that list. He was a big guy, looming, don't really care his height, weighty too, I guess. He had a frightening long list of offenses and brutalities, and let's just say dark things done to young children, and therefore was a thing that needed to be looked into. And yes, he sure was. The monster had not been born with the name the detective added to that list. He had changed his name during a 12-year stay at a facility for violent S-offenders. His abuses had started young, and there was lots of them. I'm not going to go into any of the details on them. He was/is a sick man, being Now, his main MO was to dress up as an officer and intimidate the children and scare them into submission. Now, bookmark this information. It becomes sadly important. Now, what brought this thing to the state of Montana is a horrible miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. It plain and simply is one state wiping its hands clean of a huge problem. You see, just after this man had been released from said facility, after doing not nearly enough time, he quickly found himself victimizing a small child. Rather than lock him back up, the state of Massachusetts, oh yeah, that's where this monster was created. When was he born? Don't care. What town in this state begot this monster? Do not care. Just know it existed. His birthday? Who can give two craps? So yeah, anyway. His mother begged the state of Massachusetts to allow her to move him to Great Falls, Montana, to his brother's home. And they allowed it. They allowed this to happen. Nice. Real nice. Okay. The monster and his mother settled into a duplex owned by his brother at 1218 First Avenue South in Great Falls. According to the neighbors, he would have huge yard sales all summer long, the kind of sales that would attract children with its massive amounts of toys and Star Wars memorabilia. He became a member of the Assembly of God Church and would oftentimes feed the congregation during potlucks and would also make special meals for the neighbors, it's said. Although they had a strong suspect, nothing ever came to light. Police never searched his brother's property where he was living at the time of Zackary's disappearance. They did, however, go to the monster's home the day of and knocked on his door. There was no answer, and a strange silence was there. There was just nothing. Zackary was just gone. Nobody had ever, in the years that followed, reported seeing the boy. No body was found. He had seemingly just vanished one cold February morning. Fast forward 3 years to the year 2000. And an officer is driving by Lincoln Elementary School. And they see what is very obviously our suspect dressed up as an officer, eyeing children. They swiftly arrest him because this is his MO. They knew at this point very well that this is his MO. Upon pulling him in, they mounted up a search warrant and finally began to search his brother's property. At this point, the perp had moved out of the home and was in his own apartment. I wasn't able to get the address, unfortunately. Now, upon searching his brother's property, they found some really gruesome things. They found a piece of plywood that had been bleached with what appeared to have been chop marks in the wood, so seemingly it was a cutting board of sorts. Most importantly, they found remains. Yeah, they found remains. They found a piece of a child's bone wrapped in stationery, buried underneath the garage in the property. It doesn't appear that garage is there anymore. That garage looks like a new garage from what I can see. Okay, so they sent them in for DNA testing because no assumptions. And in the meantime, they kept searching properties. This time they shifted focus to his apartment. It's told his apartment was much like a hoarder's. Remember those yard sales? So when they went through his apartment, they found a variety of very incriminating information. First off, they noted that there was a pulley in his kitchen. They found that very odd. They found a meat grinder and tons of notes written in a code of sorts, and they found a list. Zackary's name was on this list, along with some other local boys, 3 of whom were brothers who happened to live upstairs from the perp. Now, the perp was a creepy dude, but he'd managed to fool a few folks here in town. Some saw right through him, like the time he rolled a ball to a 3-year-old as his parents moved into the complex. They picked up pretty quickly on the vibes and let their child nowhere near the man. But like I'd said, he in fact had fooled some. One being the mother of 3 boys upstairs. She had sadly allowed her children to spend time with the monster, and bad things had happened. The police interviewed the brothers, and one was so young he really couldn't say what he had witnessed or had been subject to. One was so scared he denied anything happened to him. But the oldest brother broke down during his questioning and admitted he had been abused, as well as his brothers. The pulley comes in here. In the meantime, the bones had come back from the lab. It turns out the bones were not Zackary. They had no idea whom the child was that the remains had belonged to. And sadly, to this day, the child remains Cascade County Doe. The child was around 8 to 18 years old, and like I said, remains Cascade County Doe. They still had nothing to go on with Zackary's case as far as physical evidence. This boy didn't just walk off the face of the earth, and a whole lot of gruesome circumstantial evidence pointed toward this man, this thing, this killer. But things were going to start to add up to paint an even more macabre picture when they managed to decipher a code. You'll remember I'd mentioned the coded writing that they had found in the apartment. Well, they had managed to decipher this code, and it became apparent that they were looking at a cookbook. A cookbook with titles I'm not going to repeat. Remember those meals that I had mentioned he'd like to share with neighbors and churchgoers? The meat grinder? The seemingly cutting board? The police were putting together an ugly, dark thoughts of just what they truly thought had happened to Zach that February day. A day they had since learned both his mother and brother, that being the monsters, were out of town. They had plenty to charge the monster with, the abuse of the three brothers, and they were proceeding forth with that case. The detectives knew they were going to have a bit of a hard time getting Zach's mom to admit her son was no longer coming home. An even harder one was to get her to accept the fate they had believed for her baby boy. That would be a hard one for anyone to accept, honestly. If you think about it, nobody wants to think that something like that's happened to their child. But they'd felt that in the end, they had to convince her so they could press for these murder charges and the kidnapping charges and prepared to try him for Zackary. They had their very strong case with the brothers, and in the end, we will find that to be an amazing savings grace, as something was going to happen that knocked the case on its bottom when a video reached Zach's mother. Now, this video appeared to show Zackary playing on a military base. Do you remember Zackary's father was a military man? So she'd found a video, and it appeared to show Zackary playing on a military base out of the country. The detectives looked into this video and found the boy and his parents. The boy, though very, very oddly, was named Zach. And though very, very oddly he was an interracial boy as well, he was not Zach. Now, his mom would not accept it. Her heart wanted that baby to be alive, and I can't blame her a single bit. How heartbreaking it must have been. How much hope it must have gave her to believe that he could return someday. Now, the detectives soon got word that Rachel was seen meeting with the defense team. When they asked her about it, she admitted she had been at the offices, and she was no longer prepared to get on the stand and say that her son was no longer living, nor that the man had done anything to him. Detectives knew this case was sunk. If the victim's own mother was not even willing to testify she believed her son was not alive, no jury would convict. They had no choice but to just drop the charges. Now, thankfully, they still had their case for the boys. That was taken to trial, and he was found guilty of the horrendous crimes we outlined.